She never thought her daughter's first birthday would be the day she lost everything. Drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. The holding cell smelled like sweat and fear, and she sat on the metal bench with her head in her hands, trying to understand how 24 hours could destroy a life. Yesterday morning, she'd been singing happy birthday to Maya, watching her baby girl smash chocolate cake into her curls. By yesterday afternoon, Child Services had taken Maya from her arms while she screamed. By evening, the police had arrested her for fraud, identity theft, and making false claims of paternity against one of the richest men in the country. Her name was Zara Mitchell, and she was 23 years old. She'd been 3 classes away from finishing her nursing degree when Maya was born. She'd been working 2 jobs and taking night classes, surviving on 4 hours of sleep and pure determination. She'd been building something, a future, a life where her daughter would never know hunger or instability or fear. Now she wore an orange jumpsuit and had a court-appointed lawyer who looked at her like she was trash. "Miss Mitchell?" The guard's voice cut through her thoughts. "Your attorney's here." The woman who entered the consultation room looked exhausted and overworked, carrying a briefcase that had seen better days. She sat down across from Zara without offering a handshake. "I'm Rebecca Torres. I've been assigned your case." She pulled out a folder. "I'm gonna be honest with you, this looks bad. Really bad." Zara's throat tightened. "I didn't do anything wrong. The prosecution has evidence that you created fake documents claiming Alexander Winters is your daughter's father. They have records showing you sent multiple letters to his company demanding money. They have testimony from his lawyers stating he's never met you and that you're running an extortion scheme." Rebecca looked up. "Did you send those letters?" "Yes, but did you forge documents?" "No, I never forged anything. Maya's birth certificate has his name on it because he is her father." Rebecca closed her eyes briefly. "Miss Mitchell, Alexander Winters is one of the most powerful men in this state. He owns half the real estate downtown. He has lawyers who cost more per hour than most people make in a month. And you're telling me he got you pregnant? And then, what, forgot about you?" "He didn't forget," Zara's voice cracked. "He didn't believe me." It had started 2 years ago at a medical conference where she'd been working as catering staff to pay for textbooks. He'd been the keynote speaker, talking about investing in healthcare innovation. She'd been clearing champagne glasses when he'd stopped her to ask about the nursing textbook sticking out of her bag. They'd talked for hours. He'd seemed genuinely interested in her dreams, her struggles, her determination to break the cycle of poverty that had defined her childhood. When he'd asked her for her number, she thought maybe, impossibly, this was one of those rare moments when life surprised you. They'd seen each other for 3 months, always at his penthouse, always in secret. He'd said his life was complicated, that the media would make things difficult, that he needed to keep his personal life private. She'd understood. She'd believed he cared about her. Then she'd gotten pregnant. "I told him the day I found out," Zara said quietly. "He said he needed time to process it. Then he stopped returning my calls. When I finally reached him, he said he'd made a mistake getting involved with me, and that if I tried to claim the baby was his, he would destroy me." Rebecca was quiet for a long moment. "Do you have any proof you had a relationship with him?" "We weren't exactly taking selfies. He was paranoid about privacy." "Text messages, emails, gifts he bought you, anyone who saw you together?" Zara shook her head, feeling the walls closing in. She'd been so careful to respect his boundaries, never imagining she'd one day need evidence that they existed together at all. "Then we have a problem," Rebecca said, "because his lawyers are claiming you're a con artist who researched him online and fabricated an entire relationship. They're saying you targeted him specifically because he's wealthy and has a reputation for being private. They're painting you as calculating and predatory. That's insane. I have a daughter who looks exactly like him." "Physical resemblance isn't admissible as paternity evidence. We'd need a DNA test, and he's refused to provide one." Rebecca leaned forward. "Miss Mitchell, I need you to understand what you're facing. If you're convicted, you could spend years in prison. Your daughter would grow up without you. Your best option right now is to take a plea deal. Admit to making false claims in exchange for a reduced sentence. No, the word came out fierce. I won't admit to something I didn't do. I won't let my daughter grow up thinking her mother was a liar. Then you need to prepare yourself for a trial you'll probably lose. The guard came to take her back to the cell before she could respond. As she walked down the gray corridor, she thought about Maya's laugh, the way she reached her tiny hands up whenever Zara entered a room. She thought about the life she'd promised her daughter, all the ways she'd sworn things would be different. She thought about Alexander Winters in his tower downtown, insulated by money and power and lawyers who could make inconvenient women disappear. And she wondered if justice was ever really possible for people like her. Back in the cell, a woman in the corner was crying quietly. Another stared at the ceiling, lips moving in silent prayer. Zara closed her eyes and tried to remember what hope felt like. She didn't know that across the city, in a high-rise office overlooking the river, her entire world was about to shift. 3 days in jail taught her that time moves differently when you've lost everything. The arraignment was brief and humiliating. She stood in front of the judge in shackles, while the prosecutor described her as a manipulative opportunist who'd targeted a prominent businessman. Bail was set at $50,000, an amount that might as well have been $50 million. Her public defender barely spoke. Back in the cell, she was given 10 minutes for a phone call. She used it to call her daughter's temporary foster home, just to hear Maya babbling in the background. The foster mother was kind enough to hold the phone close to her, and Zara closed her eyes, memorizing the sound. I'm coming for you, baby. I promise. She didn't know if promises meant anything anymore. That evening, a different guard appeared at her cell. Mitchell, you've got a visitor. My lawyer already came today. Different visitor. Says it's urgent. She was led to a private consultation room, the kind usually reserved for high-profile cases. Sitting at the table was a man she didn't recognize, wearing an expensive suit and carrying a leather briefcase that probably cost more than her car had. Miss Mitchell, my name is James Chen. I'm an attorney with Morrison and Associates. He gestured for her to sit. I'd like to discuss representing you. She stared at him. I can't afford you. I'm not asking you to pay. My firm has been retained on your behalf. By who? That information is confidential at this time. What I can tell you is that we've been reviewing your case and we believe you've been subjected to a serious miscarriage of justice. He opened his briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. We'd like to take over your defense immediately. Zara's mind raced. This didn't make sense. Why would anyone pay for my defense? I don't know you. I don't know anyone with that kind of money except... She stopped, her heart pounding. Did Alexander send you? Is this some kind of trap? I'm not working for Mr. Winters. I'm working for you. James's expression was calm but serious. I understand you're suspicious. You have every right to be. But I need you to trust me enough to let me help you, starting with getting you out of here. Bail is $50,000. We're aware. It'll be posted within the hour. She felt dizzy. I don't understand what's happening. You will soon. For now, I need you to sign these documents authorizing me to represent you. Once you're released, we'll meet at my office and discuss strategy. He slid papers across the table. I know you're frightened and confused. I know you've been betrayed and abandoned. But I promise you, Miss Mitchell, we're going to make this right. There was something in his voice, a certainty that made her want to believe him even though her entire life had just taught her that believing people was dangerous. She signed the papers with shaking hands. 2 hours later, she walked out of the jail into the cool evening air, barely believing she was free. A black car was waiting at the curb. James opened the door for her. Where are we going? First, to see your daughter. I've arranged for a supervised visit. Then we have work to do. The drive to the foster home felt surreal. Zara pressed her forehead against the window, watching the city lights blur past, afraid that if she blinked, she'd wake up back in that cell. When Maya was brought into the visitation room, Zara broke down completely. She held her daughter and sobbed, kissing her face, breathing in the baby shampoo smell of her hair. Mama's here, baby girl, she whispered. Maya grabbed her face with both tiny hands and giggled, and Zara felt her heart shatter and rebuild itself simultaneously.
The visit was only 30 minutes, but it was oxygen after drowning. At James's office, a glass-walled space downtown that screamed money and power, he laid out the situation with brutal honesty. The charges against you are based on circumstantial evidence and Alexander Winter's statement that he's never met you. The prosecution's case relies on the assumption that you're lying. He pulled up images on his laptop. But we're going to prove that not only did you have a relationship with Mr. Winters, but that he deliberately concealed it and is now committing perjury to avoid responsibility. How? I don't have proof. We're going to find it. My firm employs the best investigators in the state. We're going to pull security footage, phone records, financial transactions. We're going to interview everyone who worked at his building during the time you were seeing him. We're going to reconstruct your relationship piece by piece until we have an undeniable timeline. Zara felt a flicker of something she'd almost forgotten. Hope. Why are you doing this? She asked quietly. Who's paying you? James hesitated. Someone who believes you deserve justice. Someone who has their own reasons for wanting the truth to come out. That's all I can say right now. But, Miss Mitchell, I know you want answers. You'll get them. But right now, we need to focus on building your defense and getting your daughter back. Can you trust me to do that? She looked at him for a long moment, this stranger who'd appeared like a miracle at the worst moment of her life. She thought about Maya's face, about the future she'd promised her, about the truth that was worth fighting for even when the odds were impossible. Yes, she said. I trust you. Good, then let's get to work. Over the next 2 weeks, James's team moved like a force of nature. Investigators tracked down the catering company she'd worked for and found the roster from the conference where she'd met Alexander. They pulled security logs showing her entering his residential tower repeatedly over 3 months. They found the doorman who'd smiled at her every time she visited, who called her Ms. Zara and asked about her classes. They found a parking receipt from the night Alexander had taken her to an exclusive restaurant outside the city, a place where they wouldn't be recognized. They found the hospital records from her pregnancy showing she listed Alexander Winters as the father from the very beginning, months before Maya was born. Piece by piece, they built a case that proved she'd been telling the truth all along. But Alexander's lawyers fought back hard. They filed motions to suppress evidence. They threatened the doorman until he recanted his statement. They leaked stories to the media painting Zara as an obsessed stalker who'd manipulated her way into Alexander's building. The trial date was set for 6 weeks away. And then 3 days before jury selection was supposed to begin, James called her into his office with an expression she couldn't read. Something's happened. Something that changes everything. Her stomach dropped. What? Alexander Winters wants to meet with you, in person, tomorrow. The room seemed to tilt. Why? He didn't say. His lawyers contacted me directly and requested a private meeting. Just the two of you. That's insane. He's been calling me a liar for 2 years. Why would he want to see me now? James leaned back in his chair, studying her carefully. I think he's starting to realize he can't win this case. We've built something solid, Zara. We've proven you're telling the truth. And I think he knows that if this goes to trial, his entire life is going to be dissected in public. His reputation will be destroyed. Good. He deserves it. Maybe. But you need to think about what you really want from this. Do you want revenge, or do you want your daughter to have a father who acknowledges her? The question hit her like cold water. She'd been so focused on clearing her name, on proving she wasn't a liar, that she hadn't thought about what came after. I don't know, she whispered. Then maybe this meeting will help you figure it out. She spent that night unable to sleep, playing the conversation over and over in her mind, imagining everything she wanted to say to the man who'd abandoned her and tried to destroy her. She didn't know that tomorrow would bring the truth she'd been fighting for. But she also didn't know it would come with a revelation that would shake everything she thought she understood. She chose her outfit carefully, wanting to look strong, not broken.
The meeting was set for 10 a.m. at a neutral location, a law office that specialized in mediation. James drove her there, his presence steady and reassuring. "Remember," he said as they parked, "you don't have to agree to anything today. This is just a conversation. You have all the power here." She nodded, but her hands were shaking. The conference room was all glass and steel, impersonal and cold. Alexander was already there, standing by the window, his back to the door. When he turned around, she felt the full weight of 2 years collapse into a single moment. He looked older, tired. His perfect hair was slightly disheveled, and there were shadows under his eyes that hadn't been there before. "Zara," he said quietly. She didn't respond, just stared at him, waiting. "I asked to meet you because—" He stopped, seeming to struggle with the words. "Because I owe you an explanation and an apology." "You think an apology fixes this?" Her voice came out harder than she intended. "You tried to put me in prison. You took my daughter away from me. You called me a liar in front of the entire world." "I know. I know what I did was unforgivable." "Then why did you do it?" He moved to the table and sat down heavily, and for the first time she saw something in him that looked like genuine pain. "Because I was afraid. When you told me you were pregnant, I panicked. My entire life has been about control, about managing my image and my empire and making sure nothing threatens what I've built. And suddenly, there was this variable I couldn't control. A child. A relationship I'd hidden. The potential for everything to fall apart. So you decided to destroy me instead. I convinced myself you were lying, that it couldn't possibly be mine, that you were just another person trying to exploit me." He looked up at her. "I wanted to believe that because it was easier than facing the truth." "What truth?" "That I'd gotten someone pregnant and abandoned them. That I was my father." The words hung in the air between them. "Your father?" she asked. "He left my mother when she was pregnant with me, refused to acknowledge me for years. I grew up watching her struggle, watching her beg for support he could easily afford. When he finally admitted I was his son, it was only because his lawyers told him it would be worse if he kept denying it." Alexander's voice was hollow. "I swore I'd never be like him, and then I did exactly what he did." Zara felt something crack inside her chest. Not forgiveness, not yet, but understanding. "You could have just asked for a DNA test. You could have verified the truth instead of trying to bury me." "I know, but by the time I realized how wrong I'd been, I'd already set everything in motion. My lawyers had already filed charges. The media had already printed stories about the con artist trying to trap me. I didn't know how to undo it without destroying myself." He looked at her directly. "That's not an excuse. It's just the truth." "So what changed? Why are you here now?" He pulled an envelope from his jacket and slid it across the table. "Because someone made me face what I'd done." She opened the envelope. Inside was a DNA test result dated 3 days ago. Probability of paternity, 99.98%. Her breath caught. "How did you—" "Someone sent me Maya's DNA. I don't know how they got it, but when it arrived at my office with a note saying I should find out the truth before I destroyed an innocent woman, I couldn't ignore it anymore." His voice cracked. "I took the tests, Zara, and I've spent the last 72 hours realizing I have a daughter I've never held, that I've spent 2 years trying to erase someone who's been telling the truth all along." She stared at the paper in her hands, this proof she'd been begging for, fighting for, almost destroying herself for, and now here it was, delivered not through justice, but through someone's intervention. Who sent it? "I don't know. The package was anonymous, but whoever it was saved me from making the worst mistake of my life permanent." James had been standing quietly by the door, but now he spoke up. "Mr. Winters, your lawyers are prepared to drop all charges against Miss Mitchell?" "Immediately, and I've already contacted Child Services to begin the process of returning custody to Zara. I know that doesn't undo the damage. I know Maya spent weeks with strangers because of me. I know you sat in a jail cell because of me. I know I can't fix that."
"No," Zara said quietly, "you can't. But I want to try to make things right. For Maya, if not for you. I want to acknowledge her, support her, be part of her life if you'll allow it." She felt tears burning behind her eyes. This was what she'd wanted. Proof, acknowledgement, her daughter's father accepting responsibility. But sitting here looking at him, all she felt was exhausted. "I need time," she said, "to think, to process this, to figure out what I want." "Of course, take all the time you need." He stood up. "I've arranged for a press conference tomorrow to set the record straight. I'm going to tell everyone that I was wrong, that you were telling the truth, and that Maya is my daughter. My lawyers will handle retracting the charges and clearing your record." "That's not enough," James said firmly. "Ms. Mitchell has suffered enormous damages. Lost income, emotional distress, legal fees, even with our representation, the trauma of separation from her child. We'll need to discuss compensation." Alexander nodded. "Whatever's fair, I'll sign whatever you need." After he left, Zara sat in silence, staring at the DNA test results. "Who do you think sent his office Maya's DNA?" she asked. James's expression was carefully neutral. "I have my suspicions, but I think some questions are better left unanswered." "You know who's been paying for my defense, don't you?" "Yes." "Tell me." He hesitated, then sat down across from her. "Your case caught the attention of someone powerful. Someone who's made it their mission to hold people like Alexander Winters accountable when they tried to use their money to escape responsibility. They reached out to our firm and asked us to take your case pro bono. They provided resources for the investigation, and when they realized the evidence we were gathering might not be enough to guarantee victory, they took matters into their own hands. They got Maya's DNA without my permission. They did. And I'm not going to defend that choice, but they did it because they believed you were telling the truth and because they knew Alexander would never agree to a test otherwise. I want to know who they are. They've requested anonymity, but they did say that if you win your case, they'd be willing to meet with you to explain their reasons." She looked down at the test results again, this piece of paper that changed everything. "I don't know if I want to meet them," she said quietly. "I don't know if I want to owe anyone anything else." "You don't owe anyone anything, Zara. You fought for yourself and for your daughter. This victory is yours, regardless of who helped make it possible." That night, alone in her small apartment after visiting Maya at the foster home, Zara stood by the window and looked out at the city. 2 years ago, she'd stood in a penthouse across town and believed in fairy tales. She'd believed that love could bridge impossible gaps, that her dreams were achievable, and that good things could happen to people like her. Then, reality had crushed those beliefs into dust. But now, holding the DNA test that proved she'd been right all along, she felt something shifting inside her. Not naivety returning, but something harder and more valuable. The knowledge that she could survive the worst and still stand. That she could fight impossible battles and win. That her daughter would grow up knowing her mother had faced down power and refused to break. She thought about the mysterious benefactor who'd intervened in her life. Part of her was angry about the invasion of privacy, the manipulation, even if it was ultimately helpful. But part of her was curious. Who saw her story and decided it was worth fighting for? Who had the power to challenge someone like Alexander Winters and chose to use it on behalf of a struggling nursing student nobody else would believe? Maybe she did want to meet them after all. Maybe she wanted to understand what justice looked like when it came from unexpected places. The press conference the next day was surreal. She stood beside James while Alexander faced dozens of cameras and admitted everything. He confirmed that Zara had been telling the truth, that Maya was his daughter, that he'd made terrible mistakes driven by fear and arrogance. He apologized publicly and announced he would be taking full financial responsibility for his child. The media, which had spent weeks portraying Zara as a con artist, suddenly pivoted to calling her a victim. Her phone exploded with interview requests and messages of support from strangers. But what mattered most was the call from Child Services 2 hours later, informing her that Maya's custody was being returned to her immediately. When she held her daughter again, this time knowing she'd never have to let go, she finally let herself cry with relief. Still, even in that moment of triumph, she couldn't shake the question that haunted her. Who had really saved her, and why? Freedom, she discovered, came with complications she hadn't expected. The criminal charges were dropped, her record expunged as if the nightmare had never happened. Alexander's lawyers drafted an agreement for child support that was more generous than she'd ever imagined, enough that she could finish school without working 2 jobs, enough that Maya would never worry about money the way Zara had growing up. But the media attention was overwhelming. Camera crews followed her to class, reporters called her at all hours asking for exclusive interviews. Strangers recognized her at the grocery store and wanted to tell her their own stories of being dismissed or disbelieved. She understood their need to connect, but she was exhausted. Alexander requested supervised visits with Maya, and after long conversations with her therapist and with James, Zara agreed. She wouldn't let her own pain prevent her daughter from knowing her father, even if watching them together reopened wounds she was still learning to heal. The first visit was awkward. Alexander held Maya like she was made of glass, his hands shaking, his eyes filled with something that looked like grief for all the time he'd lost. Maya, who'd never met this man before, cried and reached for Zara. "It's okay," Zara said gently, taking her daughter back. "This takes time." "I don't know how to do this," Alexander admitted, and for a moment he looked lost in a way that reminded her of the man she'd once believed she knew. "Neither do I. We figure it out together." For her. Over the following weeks, they developed a careful routine, short visits that gradually got longer. Alexander reading picture books to Maya in soft, uncertain tones. Zara watching from across the room, protective and wary, but willing to try. She returned to her nursing classes, walking into lecture halls where other students whispered and stared. But her professors were supportive, giving her extensions on assignments she'd missed and checking in on how she was managing. "You know," her clinical instructor said one afternoon, "you've got a hell of a story. Have you thought about advocacy work, speaking up for other women in similar situations?" "I'm still living my story. I don't know if I'm ready to tell it yet." But the seed was planted. One evening, 3 months after the charges were dropped, James called her into his office. "There's someone who wants to meet you, the person who funded your defense." Her heart jumped. "They're ready to identify themselves?" "Yes, but I need to prepare you. This is going to be surprising." "Just tell me who it is." "It's better if you meet them yourself. Tomorrow, if you're available. They've invited you to their home." She spent that night anxious and curious in equal measure. Who would go to such lengths for a stranger, and what would they want from her in return? The next morning, James drove her to an estate outside the city, the kind of property that spoke of old money and quiet power. The house was elegant without being ostentatious, surrounded by gardens that looked like they'd been there for generations. An elderly woman in her 60s answered the door, dressed simply but with the kind of grace that came from a lifetime of confidence. Her hair was silver, her eyes sharp and kind simultaneously. "Miss Mitchell," she said warmly, "I'm Eleanor Winters. Thank you for coming." Zara felt the ground shift beneath her feet. "Winters? Are you—" "Yes." "Alexander's mother?" "Yes." Eleanor gestured inside. "Please, come in. We have a great deal to talk about." The living room was filled with light, comfortable furniture arranged around a fireplace where a fire crackled despite the mild weather. Eleanor poured tea from a delicate pot and sat down across from Zara. I imagine you have questions, Eleanor said. You paid for my defense? Zara couldn't keep the disbelief out of her voice. You're his mother. Why would you help me? Because I know what it's like to be in your position. Eleanor's expression was steady. I know what it's like to be pregnant and abandoned by a man who won't acknowledge his child. I know what it's like to be called a liar when you're telling the truth. I lived that story 40 years ago. Zara remembered what Alexander had said about his father. But eventually his father acknowledged him. Eventually. After years of legal battles and public humiliation, after I nearly destroyed myself trying to prove what I knew to be true. Eleanor set down her teacup carefully. I swore that if I ever had the power to prevent another woman from going through what I experienced, I would use it. But Alexander is your son. You helped destroy his defense.
I helped expose his lie. There's a difference. Eleanor's voice was firm. I love my son deeply, but I couldn't stand by and watch him repeat his father's cruelty. When I saw the news about your case, I recognized the pattern immediately. I knew he was lying because I'd heard those same lies decades ago. How did you get Maya's DNA? I have resources and connections. When I decided to intervene, I was thorough. She met Zara's eyes. I won't apologize for violating your privacy. I won't claim it was entirely ethical, but I would do it again because the truth mattered more than propriety. Zara didn't know how to feel. This woman had manipulated her case, invaded her life, made decisions without her consent, but she'd also saved her. Why didn't you just talk to Alexander directly, tell him to do the right thing? I tried. He wouldn't listen to me. He'd convinced himself you were lying, and he'd surrounded himself with lawyers who reinforced that belief. I realized the only way to break through his denial was to force him to face objective proof. Eleanor stood and walked to the window, looking out at the gardens. I failed my son in many ways. I didn't protect him from his father's cruelty. I didn't teach him how to be brave when it mattered. I gave him everything except the courage to face difficult truths. She turned back to Zara. But I won't fail my granddaughter, and I won't let him fail her either. You could have just sent him the DNA test anonymously. You didn't have to fund my entire defense. I did, because I wanted to make sure you won, regardless of whether Alexander chose to do the right thing. I wanted you to have the best lawyers, the best investigators, every possible advantage. You deserved that much. Zara felt tears building. I don't know how to thank you. You don't need to thank me. You need to finish your degree and build the life you've been fighting for. Eleanor sat back down. I'd like to be part of Maya's life, if you'll allow it. I'd like to be the grandmother I should have been from the beginning. Does Alexander know you did this? He does now. I told him after the press conference. He was angry at first. Then he broke down and cried. I think it forced him to see how badly he'd failed and how close he came to becoming exactly what he hated most. They sat in silence for a moment, two women connected by a man who'd abandoned them both in different ways, now united in protecting a child who deserved better. There's something else, Eleanor said. I've established a trust fund for Maya, for her education, her future, whatever she needs. But I've also set up a foundation in your name, the Zara Mitchell Foundation for Single Mothers Facing Legal Injustice. I'd like you to help run it. Zara stared at her. I don't understand. You're not the only woman who's been dismissed, disbelieved, and destroyed by powerful men who refuse to take responsibility. There are hundreds of cases like yours every year. Women who lose custody of their children, who face criminal charges, who can't afford proper legal defense. I want to help them the way I helped you, and I want you to lead that effort. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not qualified to. You're qualified by experience. You understand what these women face better than any attorney ever could. You can identify the cases worth fighting for. You can be the voice that says, I believe you, when no one else will. Zara felt overwhelmed. I need to think about this. Of course, take all the time you need. Eleanor smiled gently. But I hope you'll say yes. You have a power now that you didn't have before. People know your name. They know your story. You can use that to help others find justice. The drive back to the city felt different. Zara looked out at the streets where she'd struggled for so long, where she'd worked 2 jobs and studied through exhaustion and fought for survival. She thought about all the women still fighting those same battles, still struggling to be believed. That night, she fed Maya and rocked her to sleep, singing softly about better tomorrows. And as she held her daughter, she thought about the future that was suddenly possible. She could finish her degree and become a nurse, the dream she'd held since childhood. Or she could take Eleanor's offer and fight for women who needed someone to believe them. She didn't know yet which path to choose, but for the first time in years, she felt like she had real choices, not just survival, but possibility. And maybe that was its own kind of justice. 6 months later, Zara stood in front of a classroom of law students telling her story. She'd made her decision. She'd finished her nursing degree online while helping establish the foundation, realizing she could honor both parts of herself, the healer and the fighter. The foundation had taken on its first 3 cases, all women fighting paternity disputes against wealthy men who refused to take accountability.
The system isn't designed for people like me, she told the students. It's designed for people who can afford the best lawyers, who have power and connections, who can control narratives. When you're poor and black and female, the assumption is that you're lying, that you're trying to take something you don't deserve, that you're the problem. She paused, looking at the young faces watching her intently. But here's what I learned. Justice doesn't just happen. It's fought for. It's built case by case, story by story, person by person. And sometimes it comes from the most unexpected places. After the talk, a young woman approached her hesitantly. Miss Mitchell, I just wanted to say, your story gave me courage. I've been fighting for 2 years to get support from my daughter's father. His family has money and lawyers, and everyone tells me to give up. But hearing what you went through, knowing you won, her voice broke. It made me feel less alone. Zara took her hand. You're not alone. Give your information to my assistant. We'll review your case. This had become routine. Everywhere she spoke, women approached with their own stories of abandonment and injustice. She couldn't help everyone, but the foundation helped as many as they could. Alexander had become a surprisingly involved father. He saw Maya 3 times a week now, and the awkwardness had gradually transformed into genuine connection. He'd enrolled in parenting classes and therapy, working to overcome the emotional barriers that had made him run in the first place. She's amazing, he told Zara one afternoon, watching Maya build a tower of blocks. Every time I see her, I feel sick thinking about what I almost lost. You did lose it. Her first year, her first steps, her first words. You lost all of that because you were afraid. I know. His voice was heavy with regret. I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make up for it. You can't make up for lost time. You can only try to be better going forward. He looked at her. Do you think you'll ever forgive me? She considered the question carefully. I don't know. Some days I'm close. Other days I remember sitting in that jail cell and I get angry all over again. But I'm working on it. For Maya's sake, if not for yours. That's more than I deserve. Probably. But she deserves a father who's present and accountable. So I'm trying. Eleanor had become a constant presence in their lives, a grandmother who doted on Maya, but also pushed Zara to dream bigger. She introduced her to donors and activists, helping expand the foundation's reach. They met for tea once a week, two women who understood each other in ways that went beyond words. You know, Eleanor said during one of their meetings, I've been thinking about my story, about whether I should go public with it. About Alexander's father? Yes, he's still alive, still powerful, still convinced he did nothing wrong. I've spent 40 years keeping quiet to protect Alexander, but maybe it's time people knew the truth. That's a big step. I learned from you that silence protects the wrong people, that stories have power. Eleanor smiled. Besides, I'm 73 years old. What can he do to me now? 3 months later, Eleanor published a memoir that sent shockwaves through their city's social circles. She named Alexander's father and detailed his decades of refusing to acknowledge his son, the legal battles she'd fought, the emotional devastation of raising a child alone while the father lived in luxury blocks away. The book became a bestseller. Alexander's father issued denials, but the documentation Eleanor provided was irrefutable. His reputation crumbled overnight. Did you know she was writing this? Alexander asked Zara when the book released. She mentioned it. Why? Because she dedicated it to Maya, for my granddaughter, who I hope will never know the shame her father and grandmother once carried. He looked shaken. She's braver than I ever was. It's not a competition. She did what she needed to do. You did what you needed to do. We all heal differently. The foundation grew rapidly. By the end of the year, they'd helped 12 women win their cases, securing millions in child support and establishing legal precedents that made it harder for wealthy defendants to hide behind power and privilege. Zara hired a small staff, including 2 lawyers who'd faced similar injustices in their own lives. They worked from an office downtown, not far from the tower where Alexander lived, a deliberate choice that felt like reclaiming territory. One afternoon, sorting through case files, Zara came across a letter that made her stop breathing. Dear Miss Mitchell, I saw you speak at the law school last month. I'm a journalist investigating a story about powerful men who abandon their children and use their wealth to avoid responsibility. I believe there are dozens of cases similar to yours. Would you be willing to talk?
She set the letter aside, her hands shaking slightly. This was bigger than she'd imagined. Bigger than one foundation or one woman's story. She picked up the phone and called the journalist. The article published 6 months later was devastating and thorough. It documented 43 cases across 10 years of wealthy men who denied paternity, used their resources to intimidate mothers into silence, and escaped accountability while their children grew up in poverty. Alexander's case was featured prominently, but so were others. The article sparked national conversations about power, privilege, and the ways the legal system failed to protect vulnerable women and children. Legislative reforms followed. New laws requiring DNA testing when paternity was disputed, stronger penalties for perjury in family court, resources for low-income mothers facing legal battles. Zara testified before the state legislature, telling her story once more, watching lawmakers take notes and nod with what looked like genuine concern. We have an opportunity, she told them, to create a system where the truth matters more than how much money you have, where children don't suffer because their fathers are cowards, where women aren't destroyed for telling the truth. The reforms passed. On Maya's 3rd birthday, Zara threw a small party in their new apartment, a place with enough space for her daughter to run and play. Alexander came, bringing an elaborate dollhouse that made Maya shriek with delight. Eleanor brought homemade cake and stories about Alexander's childhood that made him groan with embarrassment. James and his family came, along with some of the women from the foundation, creating a chosen family of people who understood struggle and triumph in equal measure. Later, after everyone had left and Maya was asleep, Zara stood in her daughter's room, watching her breathe in the soft light from her nightlight. You won't remember any of this, she whispered. You won't remember the jail cell or the foster home or the fight it took to keep you. And that's good. You get to grow up just knowing you're loved,
that your mother fought for you, that your father learned to show up, that your grandmother made sure justice happened even when it seemed impossible. She thought about the girl she'd been 3 years ago, working double shifts and dreaming of a better life. She thought about the woman she'd become, forged in fire but not destroyed by it. She thought about all the women still fighting their battles and the foundation that would help them the way she'd been helped. She thought about Maya growing up in a world that was slowly, painfully, becoming more just. And she felt something she hadn't felt in years: peace. Not the absence of struggle, but the presence of purpose. Not the end of hardship, but the certainty that she could survive it. Not naive hope, but hard-won faith in her own strength. The next morning, she dropped Maya at Eleanor's house and headed to the foundation office. 3 more cases waited for review. 3 more women who needed someone to believe them. She poured coffee, opened the first file, and got to work. Because justice didn't just happen. It was built, case by case, story by story, woman by woman. And she was only getting started.